Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Peter Tite. I am the stakeholder team lead on Quorum's customer success team. I want to thank you all for joining here. And at Quorum, I'm responsible for helping clients use Quorum's stakeholder engagement tools to map, track, change, and report on their landscape. So I'm excited to cover this topic here today. Today, I'm going to review why stakeholder mapping is so important, 5 different techniques you can use to map your stakeholders, and then walk through how to actually do that. We're then going to cover over some stakeholder mapping best practices, which I've come up with, having worked with some of our largest clients. And throughout this, please feel free to submit your questions through the chat box. I'll be sure to answer them at the end of the webinar here. And if you'd like a demo of how Quorum can help you execute on your stakeholder mapping strategies, you can visit quorum.us or just let us know right there in the chat box, and we'll make sure to have someone reach out. So for those who aren't familiar with Quorum, I know we have a lot of clients on the call, but for those who are new to the Quorum system, I want to give you a quick overview before we dive into stakeholder mapping materials. So Quorum at its heart is public affairs software that helps you work smarter and move faster. So I'll explain what I mean. In Quorum, you can map, track, change, and report on the policy landscape, all from one centralized place. And one of the ways you're able to work smarter is by mapping the issues and the people that matter most to your organization, track those folks real time, and get updates on bills, issues, regulations, and dialogue that are going to be really important to you all. As things happen, you can see the impact as well that the decisions you're making are having, and decide how to react. You're able to move faster and create change in Quorum. We've got powerful tools to help you mobilize your stakeholders, your advocates, policymakers, really whoever you care about, to help move the needle on your issues. And you can move faster with smart reporting tools that make it easy to understand your impact, demonstrate that impact for your stakeholders. So we pride ourselves in our ability to help solve problems for public affairs professionals better really than anyone else. First, the experience using Quorum is integrated. So all the information that you have is going to be in one centralized place to help you execute your strategy. Second, while some of our competitors have to make decisions to satisfy their investors, we're 100% bootstrapped. So we're only invested in you. We apply all of the feedback we get from our customers to build best-in-class software. And that's how we get better at helping you move faster and work smarter year after year. So finally, Quorum's customer success team, which I happen to be a bit biased towards, is really best in class. Your customer success manager will walk you through the year, and our on-site support team is going to be able to give you fast answers to questions that you have along the way. So let's get into the content of the day here. What is stakeholder mapping? Stakeholder mapping is a unified tracking system that collects and measures ongoing engagement with stakeholders. That provides each individual on your team the most up-to-date information on where each stakeholder stands on your issues. So I want to send out a poll that you will see on your screen here. The first critical step to stakeholder mapping is having all of your contacts in one place. So I want to ask the audience on the line here, what system does your team use to manage your contacts with? Is it a spreadsheet? Do you just rely on your Outlook or your Gmail? Do you use Salesforce? Are you a Quorum client, or another, use another CRM? So we'll give it a sec. We're getting lots of good responses here. It looks like we have a lot of clients on the line. So happy to see all of you folks and that you're excited to use Quorum, but almost as many people are using spreadsheets. So that's a sign to me that you really should be thinking about investing in some software to centralize this work. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here. And it looks like the most people actually use the spreadsheet. That's interesting. So stakeholder mapping is a critical step in your stakeholder engagement strategy. It's going to allow you to identify and track who your most important stakeholders are. I'd say good stakeholder mapping sets an organization up for success in measuring the impact of your work at the end of the year, because you're working at the beginning of the year to map those stakeholders, and then throughout the year you're reevaluating their placement on your map through things like the number of interactions that you've had with them, or the number of times they've actively worked or supported your issues, and then you're evaluating your team's success based on, at the core, being able to move someone along that relationship ladder, allowing them to, show that progress of the strength of relationship over time. So today we're going to show some examples using federal policymakers as an example, but these practices are standard and are going to work whether the stakeholders you're looking to engage are at the state, the local, or international level, or whether they're just key influencers, people that are really important to your business or your organization, and how you are going to be moving the needle with them. So now we're going to go over 5 stakeholder mapping techniques, including mapping by issues, by team member relationships, looking at an interest and influence matrix, tiering your stakeholders, and then mapping your stakeholders by relationship sentiment. So first things first, the the first of our 5 techniques here is mapping your stakeholders by issue. So this is going to be the issues, choosing the issues that impact your organization, and then mapping your stakeholders to those issues. By mapping stakeholders to issues, you can quickly answer the question, for example, what key stakeholders do we have on renewable energy? If your boss comes to you and says, hey, who do we know that works on this issue? You can quickly pull this list and be able to have a deliverable and an action plan that comes right from that. When new legislation is introduced, you can sort through key stakeholders with whom you need to communicate with and engage on that issue. Also, tagging stakeholders to issue will let you target specific organization updates or invitations to events, for example, based on issue area. Therefore, you can refine and specialize your communications, having a higher touch point with these individuals, as well as increasing the likelihood that they'll actually show up at your event or that they'll engage with your content, because they care about this issue. So I'm going to pull up an example of how this might look in Quorum here. And this is a Quorum sheet. So this is going to be, again, I mentioned federal lawmakers on the left side of the screen. And then we've got our issue areas right there in the second column. And you can see how many times you've met with them on a particular issue, how many times you've met with them on a different issue, and then decide, how should you be characterizing these stakeholders and tagging them to different issue areas. This is gonna be a really important step, especially if you are mimicking the same mapping that you're doing on the stakeholders level with the mapping your interactions themselves, so that you can see at the end of the year, we took 25 meetings on agriculture issues and 15 meetings on automation issues. Reassess, does that line up with what our strategic priorities are? Where do we need to course correct throughout the year? Now, the second metric or method here of tracking stakeholders is to map your stakeholders by indicating which team member is the primary relationship owner for the individual. So the vast majority of my clients decide to assign relationship holders for their stakeholders that they're targeting. This is going to, some of my clients will decide to kind of divide and conquer. For example, they'll have, one individual on their team that owns all relationships with Democrats, and then one who owns relationships with Republicans. Some of my clients will decide to kind of share the load and have several team members that own at different levels of seniority in their organization who own a relationship with a particularly important stakeholder. Either way, setting clear guidelines about which team members own which relationships in your sphere of influence will help your organization promote accountability and increase that organization. Also in Quorum, we have recently rolled out this really cool email functionality that I was really excited about, which allows you to draft one email using our bulk email tool and have that email go out from the individual on your team who owns the relationship that each individual stakeholder is receiving that email from. So for example, if I'm an admin in the office and I want to create a drafted email and announcement, I could send out one email, and it would essentially look like the people who are receiving it from the individual at my organization who they have built up a relationship with, so that they're not constantly hearing from lots of different people on your team. This is a really important way to do, to think about mapping your stakeholders. It might be something that you're already doing that you could just fold right into your database here. So here we're looking at members of, the Senate here and who has logged the most interactions with them. Obviously, it's probably not a great system if you've got this even of a disbursement. Maybe it's time to have, pick certain individuals to control these relationships and log the meetings, the majority of the meetings with these folks. Now, each of your stakeholders has a certain level of interest in the issues that you work on and a certain level of influence on that issue. With this knowledge and this information, you can build out a really cool matrix mapping the interest on one axis versus the influence on the other axis. This is going to provide you with kind of 4 distinct categories of stakeholders. You've got your high interest and high influence stakeholders, your low interest and high influence, your high interest and low influence, and then your low interest and high influence. So all this is to say that that type of knowledge is going to allow you to prioritize who you should be talking to, who you should be working with. And your first priority should be working with those folks who have both a high interest and a high influence on your issues. They're engaged on your issue. They can help you move the needle. And then your second priority should actually be those who have high influence but low interest. So we can talk about how you might be able to identify these different quadrants using Quorum. But the folks who have a lot of influence but low interests are going to be prime targets for you to spend time communicating your message with, to be able to kind of teach them and educate them about the important issues that you're working on, and then share that data in a way so that you can try to move the needle on an issue that they're already influential on. So there's a few different ways you can determine a stakeholder's interest and influence on a particular issue. First, you can use a qualitative system based on your team's interactions, your primary knowledge. You know these people, you know who's interested in which issues, and that's important information to log in a system like Quorum. But Quorum's also going to allow you to take a more quantitative approach to using data points based on, for example, legislative activity, votes, and bills proposed, as well as dialogue that they're putting out on social media and press releases and floor statements. So that's going to help you build out that information. So if we show this kind of example sheet here in a second, I'll just say here, these are, it's the next one over here. 1 second, let me just pull that up. So this, yeah, exactly. The interest and influence map is going to show you the number of times, for example, that a particular official has mentioned the issue on social media. So if they are talking about education issues a lot, and you can see, for example, Lamar Alexander may have mentioned education a lot of times, and that's going to show you that he's interested in this issue. And then you can see how many education bills has he passed out of committee on that second column to the right. And that's going to show you that he's both effectively passing bills out of committee on the issues that he's working on, in addition to being highly vocal in the dialogue. So this is one of those high interest, high influence stakeholders that you could focus on. And somebody, for example, to contrast that, John Barrasso has not mentioned education nearly as many times as Senator Alexander, but he's passed almost as many bills out of committee. So this is going to show you, if you can get in the room, meeting with his staffers, sending out emails to his team to get him to start thinking about education in a more productive way, and then you'll be able to leverage that into more bills being passed in Congress here. So now our fourth technique here to talk about stakeholder engagement is a tiered system. So with a tiered system, your organization should give every stakeholder a number, for example, 1 to 3, where tier 1 stakeholders are your biggest champions and tier 3 are going to be less influential. So you may use a subjective numbering system like I just described to figure out which tier a stakeholder belongs in, or set some strict parameters in terms of what constitutes a tier 2 versus a tier 1, such as the number of events that they've attended with you or the number of one-on-one meetings they've had with you. So I have clients who do this in a few different ways. One example that I like giving is the option of having a relationship ladder where you have our tier 1 stakeholders. We have to log at least one interaction with them every single quarter, and then our tier 2 stakeholders are going to be every 6 months, and then our tier 3 stakeholders we want to engage with at least once a year. And so that's going to allow you to run some analysis and some revisions here, where if you're almost through a quarter and you still haven't met with someone, it's probably time for you to decide, should they still remain as a tier 1? Should they move down to a tier 2, or do you really just need to get into their office and meet with them to keep up that system? So these are helpful as well as you're thinking about running a team that is doing this sort of strategic stakeholder engagement work. You're going to be able to see, how does one team member move the needle versus another team member? Does this person, who on your team is doing this effectively, and how can you articulate this? So in this example here, we've got knows our team, answers our call, attends our events as kind of our 3 tiers here. And so those are, going to allow you to make sure that this information is being reported consistently across your organization, and really give you the nuggets that you need to be able to report out on the work that you're doing on the ground. So the last technique here that I want to walk you all through is the option of mapping your stakeholders as champion, neutral, or detractors. This is going to allow you to see everyone who has influence on your organization's issues and get a sense of which direction are they leaning on your issues or towards your organization or your brand. Using these tags is going to make it easier to distinguish, for example, your messaging and how that should differ between different stakeholders. So you probably want to use different language when you're communicating with your champions, congratulating or thanking them for supporting an issue. You're going to use different language than how you would talk to your detractors, potentially trying to sway them on an issue that is important to you. So again, a clean mapping system here is going to allow you to make sure that each stakeholder is receiving the best possible message from your organization, and that you can amplify your impact with those key people. So this is really just a super useful way to start thinking about moving the needle on those folks. If you want to measure how this has changed over time, at the beginning of the quarter, maybe you assess who your champions are, your neutral folks are, your detractors are, and then run that back at the end of the year and see how that comes up. So I want to throw a poll back out to you here now that we've gone through these 5 strategies, and get a pulse on, just from the folks on the line, what strategy you think would be most effective at your organization. And again, the options are by issue, team member relationships, interest and influence matrix, a tiered system, and then mapping folks by champion, neutral, and detractor. So I'm going to launch that poll here and give some folks some time to check this out. Fantastic. So we've got a lot of participation here coming in. It looks like people would find a lot of these helpful, which is good. I think that definitely that interest influence matrix is an exciting thing. You know, I often find clients who are in the public affairs world, it's hard to like talk about ROI. And this is, you know, one of those metrics that you could be able to provide, you know, your internal folks, you know, your executive team, and say, hey, we are really focusing on the most influential and stakeholders that have the greatest interest in our organization's issues. Super. So moving on now to the kind of the last section of our presentation here. Now that you have mapped your stakeholders, you know, what's next? So I wanted to cover some best practices that I would personally recommend based on my experience working with our clients. So definitely feel free to, if you are a client or you're doing something similar, definitely feel free to throw in suggestions or topics for discussion into the chat box as well. So once you map all of your stakeholders, you now have a clear map of, you know, where you should spend your time based on your goals. So if your goal is to, for example, grow the list of your top tier stakeholders, then you want to focus on those folks in the middle. If your goal is to decrease the number of detractors, though, then maybe you want to talk about engaging more differently with those detractors and figure out kind of what moves them out of detractor into maybe neutral or into champions. If you're planning a number of initiatives, for example, on a particular issue, maybe this is synced with other, you know, business units at your organization, you can focus on the issue, you know, pushing that information to your stakeholders who are most interested in that topic. So obviously there's lots and lots of different ways that you can use this, but I just can't emphasize enough having this data clean in the first place. Committing to doing this right is going to just increase the options that you have in your toolkit exponentially. So next one down here, having a map of all your stakeholders is going to allow you to be equally proactive and reactive depending on what the policy landscape looks like for your organization. So having your stakeholders mapped means that anytime you need, you can quickly pull a list of your stakeholders who care about a particular issue, who are most important to your organization, or who are most influential on a, you know, in a particular region, for example. So I know a lot of times my clients will get questions, you know, from their executive team, and they want to be able to say, you know, who are our most important people in Kansas? We're going to Kansas next month, and we need to be able to set up some high-level meetings there. And if you can respond to them with a quick map of all the stakeholders you've mapped as, you know, tier 1 stakeholders in the region of Kansas, that's going to be really impressive and a nice deliverable for your team internally. And then finally, also here on this point is that you don't want to get caught flat-footed in a crisis. I mean, you know this, but when you've got your stakeholders mapped cleanly, you're going to be able to respond to a crisis communications, you know, really quickly, really agilely. You don't have to spend your time in those critical first hours of a crisis trying to figure out who the right people are to be communicating with. And that's just going to be, you know, it's going to behoove you to keep this up to date over time, because you never know when something will come up that's going to affect your business or organization. So a benefit of using Quorum to map your stakeholders is that our spreadsheets tool, which we've been looking at kind of a version of in Quorum, is going to be auto-updating and auto-populating. So this information in the sheet that we've been showing you is always going to be the most up-to-date. So this is going to sync back into, you know, for example, when your team member logs an interaction from their mobile phone on the mobile app, that number will be replicated on the spreadsheets that we've been looking at, based on, you know, the number of interactions that you've had with a particular stakeholder will automatically increase by 1, or the days it's been since you engaged with the stakeholder will reduce down to 0 because you're having the most up-to-date information. So if you're keeping this, you know, for the 20 or so people at the beginning of the call that said they're using spreadsheets to keep track of this information, I can guarantee you those spreadsheets are not up to date at any given point. You know, you probably know this, so it's just very helpful to have all of this data up to date and talking to each other, so you don't have to waste time cleaning everything up. So as you think about some ways to measure your impact over the course of a year, you can pull in fields for example, the beginning of 2020, and then pull that exact same field at the end of 2020, or the beginning of Congress and the end of Congress, beginning of state legislative sessions and the end of state legislative sessions. Then you can go, put out a mandate to your team to survey them and see, let's reassess these numbers. How have they changed over time, and what led to them changing? So, for example, maybe we started the year with 30 detractors, 40 neutral, and 25 champions, and then we ended our year with 15 detractors, 35 neutral, and 45 champions. That's going to be a really compelling data point to be able to show someone, and it's also going to allow you to do a deep dive into what were the specific engagement efforts that were most effective at moving people through that funnel. Are they, was it going to conferences? Was it hosting events? Was it, in-person meetings, or having folks visit your facilities or your organization? So these are all sorts of things that you're going to be able to do once you've committed to mapping this data in Quorum. Also, I'll say that you can set a standard for your team's tracking data so that it's clean and consistent. You have the ability to set a mandate and say, hey, every single one of your interactions needs to be logged into a centralized platform like Quorum, or at the beginning of the quarter, each team member is responsible for selecting 50 stakeholders and then going through and mapping each of them to an issue area, assigning them to themselves, and marking them as a champion or a detractor. So this is all, these are some ways that you can do that. So before we start Q&A, I want to talk really briefly about some of the ways that Quorum can make your stakeholder mapping easy. We've covered some of this throughout the presentation, but obviously these auto-updating spreadsheets are going to be perfect to manage your workflow, and then also to send up to folks that maybe aren't directly in your organization, maybe senior level executives, and sending them a report out on what's all the work we've had in a particular quarter, what's all of the work we've done on a particular issue, and that's going to be really compelling information. Also, I'll say just the mobile app, having the ability to pull up a stakeholder's profile before going into a meeting, or seeing them, or going to introduce yourself at a conference, and being able to say, how many times have they talked about our issues? What have we tagged them in our system? That's just going to better prepare you to do that type of work. And then having your email I can't stress this enough, really, having your email communications integrate into the same platform as having your stakeholder mapping. It's just going to be you're going to be so much happier, because you can use these fields that you've mapped to just hone that engagement strategy via email, and really make sure that the right folks are getting the right messages from your organization. So I know we've thrown a lot at you today, and I want to jump into question and answer here, but I definitely encourage you, if you want to, we're going to send a webinar, or we're going to send the slides out at the or in a second here, or actually no, after Q&A, and then folks are going to be able to request the slides after you take that survey. So really appreciate that. And then let's just jump into some questions here. So first question on the line is, it can be hard to get my team to log their meetings and notes and update our sheet for our stakeholder mapping. How can I improve the adoption of a stakeholder mapping of the team? So this is really a great question. It's something that I get asked a lot. And I think that some strategies that I've seen clients use successfully, one is, by starting with assigning the stakeholders in your universe to those team members, it's going to make the task of mapping all of those individuals much more manageable, because then you can just say, hey, John, you're in charge of mapping the stakeholders that are that are assigned to you. Here's a list. Go through, populate this sheet, and then we can, and we can review it. I've had, that's just a way to kind of divide the work up and make sure that people are able to do it. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're really committing to this, I've got clients who use this as part of their performance reviews. So when they go into a quarterly performance review, their manager sits them down and says, okay, this is how many interactions you logged. This is how many champions you maintained, or this is how many champions you had at the beginning of the quarter and how many champions you had at the end of the quarter. How can we work with you to start improving your ability to kind of build these relationships? And that's a really cool option as well. So another question on the line is, are bill information and social media mentions automatically populated, or is this something that has to be manually entered? So this is a really good question. It is pre-populated into some of Quorum's products, which is really exciting. So if you buy Quorum's federal product, for example, you're going to be able to get all of this information, the senators and the representatives and executive level folks, as well as what they're saying on social media or in press releases, the bills they're proposing, the votes that they're taking. This is all pre-populated at the federal level, at the state level, and in the EU as well. But if you're looking, you can also, if there's a particular nonprofit that you want to increase your engagement with, or a key influencer that you want to be engaging with, you can add in social media contact information for them onto their profile and be able to track that in the same place that you're tracking your legislative or your official stakeholders, which is a really cool tool to make sure you see the full picture. So the next question, it looks like it's from a client. Does the tagging work with grassroots? So if somebody rated different things, they will get a different message from their constituents. So yes, this is definitely something that is you're able to do in grassroots. You can essentially use once you've mapped all your stakeholders, if you want to have your advocates send one message to everyone who voted yes on this particular bill that's listed as a champion, and you want to send them all like a super warm and fuzzy message and have your advocates praise them for that, you can do that. And then you could send a different message to the same folks who maybe voted yes but are listed as detractors of your organization, and have your advocates remind them why it's so helpful that they were able to pass this important legislation, and why maybe they should be more aligned with your organization. Next question, while we're getting a lot of questions here, so I'll try to get to everyone. Is there a way to map stakeholder mentions of more specific terms like earned tax income credit instead of tax as an issue? This is absolutely possible, and it's something that I would actually recommend. The columns we created for these examples were very broad, but yes, you could definitely run a search for earned income tax credit, and you could even narrow that down even further to say, mentions of earned income tax credit that is within 15 words of, something else. So you can get really specific using what are called Boolean operators in Quorum to enter that information and mark that in Quorum. Next question here, how did you make the list of stakeholders you were referring to within Quorum? So this could have been really anything. If you wanted to create similar versions of my spreadsheet using just members of a particular committee or contacts that you have that work at a handful of different organizations, you could do that. What we chose just as a default in the system was members of Congress, but these spreadsheets, you have the ability to not only decide which columns to pull into these spreadsheets, but what the criteria of the rows should be. So this is completely personalizable, completely customizable, and it's all going to be live time and updating. So something that's really cool is if you want to have a spreadsheet like this where the rows are only going to be your stakeholders who are marked as champions or detractors, then what's awesome is you could have, when one of your members of your team marks a new person as a detractor or as a champion, that person will be automatically added to the row on that spreadsheet so that you're looking at the full picture of who these people are. Great. So last question, I think, unless there's some others that come in the next minute or two. Can you provide more information about your pre-populated products? I'm interested in also finding out what boards people sit on. Sure, that's it's a great question. We would probably be better suited for maybe reaching out to this individual directly. I think we've got your contact information, but just at a high level, Quorum has products at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, at the EU level, and then we've just released an international product which allows you to pull in government contacts from I think like 12 or 13 different countries around the world. So that you can see, find out contact information, biographies, social media, and so much more about these stakeholders. So there's a lot Quorum can do. There's also the ability to add in your own contacts so that you don't just have only the stakeholders that are pre-populated in Quorum system, but you have the ability to add in your own contacts and build those into Quorum with our stakeholder engagement product. So hope that I answered all of those questions here. Again, just a reminder, we're going to send a poll out right now to just get some feedback as we're iterating on this process of hosting these webinars. And if you'd like to receive more information on these slides after the fact, definitely please do take that poll. Or if you'd like to see a demo, we'd love to just come in and show your organization how this might fit into your work. So I'll let folks fill this out here, but it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm really looking forward to carrying these conversations on as people want to be in touch. But best of luck and happy mapping.